The young sailor saw the cuts on Sarah's hands and smirked. Even if she's a skilled mechanic, she's still just a woman, he told his friends. An hour later, those same hands defeated 3 terrorists in hand-to-hand combat. Those hands didn't just fix engines, they knew how to kill. Welcome to the Human Stories. Before we dive into this incredible story of hidden skills and deadly secrets, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from today. And if you believe that appearances can be deceiving in the most dangerous ways, hit that subscribe button. This story will change how you look at the quiet professionals around you. Chief Petty Officer Sarah Martinez wiped the grease from her hands with a worn shop rag, the morning sun filtering through the high windows of Hangar 12 at Norfolk Naval Shipyard. At 34, she'd been working on ship engines for what seemed like a lifetime, though most people at the yard had only known her for the past 2 years. Sarah was unremarkable in the way that truly dangerous people often are. Average height, brown hair usually pulled back in a practical ponytail with hands that showed the honest wear of someone who worked with machinery daily. The network of thin scars across her forearms and knuckles told stories she never shared. Stories most people assumed were the inevitable result of years working around sharp metal and hot engines. She preferred it that way. "Martinez," called out Chief Warrant Officer Thompson from across the hangar. "Got another engine rebuild coming in from the destroyer escort. Think you can handle it?" "Yes, Chief," Sarah replied, her voice steady and professional. She'd handle it the same way she handled everything, quietly, efficiently, and without drawing attention to herself. What Thompson didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Sarah Martinez had once been something else entirely. For 8 years, she'd been Petty Officer First Class, Sarah Ghost Martinez, Navy SEAL Team 6, Explosive Ordnance Disposal Specialist. She'd disarmed bombs in 12 different countries, eliminated high-value targets in operations that didn't officially exist, and earned commendations that would never see daylight. But that life was over. Officially, it had never existed at all. The trouble started, as it often does, with young men who had something to prove. Seaman recruit Tommy Williams had arrived at Norfolk 3 weeks ago, fresh out of basic training with top marks and an ego to match. At 19, he was all sharp angles and cocky swagger, the kind of sailor who assumed that being male and having theoretical knowledge made him superior to everyone around him. He traveled with a pack, 3 other young recruits who hung on his every word and laughed at his jokes, whether they were funny or not. They'd staked out a corner of the hangar where they could observe and comment on everyone around them, especially the civilian contractors and lower-ranking personnel they considered beneath them. "Check out Rosie the Riveter over there," Tommy said, nodding toward Sarah as she worked on a diesel engine. "Look at those hands. Looks like she's been in a fight with a blender." His friends snickered. "Probably cut herself making a sandwich," one of them added. "Hey, at least she's trying," said another with mock generosity, "even if she's just a woman." Sarah heard them. The hangar acoustics made privacy impossible. But she didn't react. She'd heard worse, in places where the consequences of distraction could be measured in body bags. Instead, she focused on the engine in front of her, her hands moving with practiced precision through the rebuild process. Tommy, emboldened by his audience, decided to get closer. "Excuse me, ma'am," Tommy said, approaching Sarah's workstation with his friends trailing behind. "I couldn't help but notice you're working on that engine. I just finished advanced propulsion systems training. Maybe I could give you some pointers." Sarah looked up from her work, her dark eyes meeting his with calm assessment. "I appreciate the offer," she said quietly, but I think I can manage." "Oh, I'm sure you're competent," Tommy continued, his tone dripping with condescension. "But some of these newer systems can be pretty complex. Lots of technical specifications that might be challenging for someone without formal training." Sarah's hands stilled on her tools. For just a moment something flickered in her expression, a hardness that had nothing to do with engine maintenance and everything to do with 3 tours in hostile territory. "I said I can manage," she repeated, her voice still quiet, but carrying an undertone that should have served as a warning. Tommy either didn't hear it or didn't care. "Hey, no shame in asking for help. We're all on the same team here. Though I have to ask." He gestured at the scars on her forearms. "You might want to be more careful with those tools. Looks like you've had some accidents." That's when Sarah stood up. She moved with fluid grace, rising to her full height and turning to face Tommy directly. She was smaller than him by 6 inches and 50 pounds, but something in her posture, the perfect balance, the ready stance, the way her hands hung loose but ready at her sides, should have triggered every survival instinct Tommy possessed. Instead, he grinned wider. "Those scars tell stories," Sarah said, her voice conversational. "Want to know what they really are?" "Sure," Tommy said, playing to his audience. "Kitchen accidents? Craft projects gone wrong." Sarah's smile was thin and cold. "Training scars, from learning how to kill people with my bare hands." Tommy laughed loudly. "Right. Sure they are." That's when the alarms started blaring. The hangar erupted in controlled chaos as the emergency klaxon echoed off the metal walls. Over the loudspeaker, a voice crackled. "Security alert condition red. All personnel implement lockdown procedures immediately. This is not a drill." Tommy and his friends looked around in confusion, but Sarah was already moving. Years of training kicked in automatically as she assessed the situation. Multiple exit points, potential cover positions, nearest weapons cache, civilian personnel locations. "What's happening?" Tommy called out, his cockiness evaporating as armed security personnel began herding everyone toward the rear of the hangar. "Probably just a drill," one of his friends said, but his voice lacked conviction. Sarah listened to the radio chatter from the security team's communications, her trained ear picking out details that others missed. Multiple breaches at the perimeter, armed intruders, potential explosive devices. This wasn't a drill. "Everyone stay calm and move to the designated assembly area," Chief Thompson called out, but Sarah noticed he was sweating despite the morning cool. That's when she saw them. 3 men in Navy utility uniforms were moving against the flow of personnel, heading deeper into the facility instead of toward the exits. Their uniforms were right. Their bearing was military, but something was wrong. Their positioning was too tactical, too professional, and one of them had a bulge under his jacket that definitely wasn't regulation. Sarah made her choice. "Tommy," Sarah said quietly, grabbing the young sailor's arm as he started to follow the crowd. "What?" "Let go of me," he protested, trying to pull away. "Those 3 men moving toward the command center," Sarah said, her voice urgent but controlled. "They don't belong here." "How can you tell?" "They're wearing our uniforms." "Because I know what real operators look like," Sarah replied, "and those are hostiles." Before Tommy could respond, Sarah was moving, but this wasn't the careful, measured movement of a ship's mechanic. This was something else entirely. The fluid, predatory grace of someone trained to eliminate threats with maximum efficiency. She approached the 3 intruders from their blind spot, using machinery and shadows for concealment. Tommy, despite his confusion and fear, found himself following her, drawn by an authority in her voice that hadn't been there moments before. The first hostile never saw her coming. Sarah struck from behind, one hand covering his mouth, while the other found the nerve cluster at the base of his neck. He dropped silently, unconscious before he hit the ground. The second man turned at the sound, reaching for his concealed weapon. Sarah's response was instantaneous, a precise strike to his wrist that sent the gun clattering across the concrete, followed by a combination that left him crumpled beside his partner. The third man was faster, more professional. He managed to draw his weapon and get a shot off, but Sarah was already moving, using equipment for cover while closing the distance. When she reached him, the fight was brief and brutal. Tommy watched in stunned silence as the woman he'd been mocking 30 minutes earlier systematically dismantled 3 armed men using nothing but her hands and tactical knowledge that clearly went far beyond engine maintenance. "Clear," Sarah called out, using hand signals that Tommy didn't recognize but somehow understood meant safety. Security forces arrived within minutes, led by a tall man in Admiral's insignia who moved with the same predatory grace Sarah had displayed. He took one look at the unconscious intruders, then at Sarah, standing over them with barely elevated breathing. "Well, well," Admiral Richardson said, a smile spreading across his weathered face. "When they told me we had a security breach, I never expected to find Ghost handling it personally." Tommy's mouth fell open. "Ghost?" Sarah straightened slightly, slipping back into military bearing. "Admiral, situation secure. 3 hostiles neutralized. No civilian casualties. Outstanding work as always," Richardson replied. "Though I thought you were retired." "I am," Sarah said. "This was extracurricular." The Admiral turned to Tommy, who was still staring in shock. "Son, do you know who you've been working with?" Tommy shook his head, not trusting his voice. "This is Sarah Martinez, former Petty Officer First Class, Navy SEAL Team 6, Explosive Ordnance Disposal Specialist, hand-to-hand combat instructor, and veteran of more classified operations than most people see in movies." Richardson's voice carried unmistakable pride. "She's personally responsible for saving more American lives than anyone in this facility. But she's just a mechanic," Tommy managed. Sarah looked at him, and for the first time, he saw past the quiet exterior to the steel underneath. "Best cover there is," she said simply. "Nobody suspects the woman with grease under her fingernails." Over the next hour, as security teams processed the scene and Tommy gave his statement, the pieces began falling into place. The 3 men were part of a larger terrorist cell that had been planning to sabotage multiple naval facilities. Sarah's quick action had prevented what could have been a catastrophic attack. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Tommy asked, as they sat in the debriefing room. "Why let people think you were just—" "Just what?" Sarah asked. "Just a mechanic? Just a woman doing a man's job? Just someone with scars who wasn't worth your respect?" Tommy flushed, remembering his earlier comments. "I told you those scars had stories," Sarah continued. "This one," she indicated a thin line along her wrist, "is from disarming an IED in Afghanistan while under sniper fire. This one," she showed another on her forearm, "is from close quarters combat in a classified location I can't name. Every mark on my hands represents someone who tried to kill me and failed." "I had no idea," Tommy said quietly. "That was the point," Sarah replied. "Real operators don't advertise. We blend in, we do our jobs, and when the time comes, we act." She stood to leave, then paused. "Tommy, you've got potential, good instincts when you're not trying to impress people. But you need to learn something. Respect isn't something you give based on what someone looks like or what gender they are. Respect is something you give because everyone around you might be carrying skills, knowledge, or experiences you can't imagine." "Yes, ma'am," Tommy said, and for the first time, he meant it. 3 months later, Tommy Williams had become one of the hardest working sailors at Norfolk Naval Shipyard. He still worked in the hangar, but now he spent his time learning from Sarah Martinez, not just about engines, but about attention to detail, situational awareness, and the kind of quiet professionalism that real military personnel embody. Sarah went back to being just a mechanic, fixing engines and avoiding attention, but Tommy noticed things now that he'd missed before. The way senior officers nodded to her with unusual respect, how security personnel always seemed to know where she was, the occasional classified briefing she attended that had nothing to do with ship maintenance. Most importantly, he'd learned to look past surfaces, the quiet cook in the galley who moved like a martial artist, the unassuming supply clerk who spoke 4 languages, the cleaning lady who had calluses from weapons training. Every base has them, Sarah told him one day as they worked side by side on a turbine rebuild. People with skills that don't match their job descriptions. People who served in ways that can't be on their official records. The smart ones learn to recognize us. The really smart ones learn from us. Tommy nodded, no longer the cocky recruit who thought he knew everything. How do you spot them? Sarah smiled, her hands steady, as she adjusted a complex mechanism. Same way you spot good machinery. Look for the ones that work perfectly without making noise. She paused, wiping grease from her hands. And remember, the most dangerous people are often the ones who look like they couldn't hurt a fly. The world is full of quiet professionals, people whose real skills are hidden behind ordinary jobs and unremarkable appearances. They walk among us, serve coffee, fix cars, teach children, and maintain the machinery that keeps our world running. Some of them have backgrounds that would shock you. Others have skills that could save your life. All of them deserve respect, regardless of what they look like or what job they appear to be doing. Have you ever met someone who turned out to be more than they appeared? Share their story in the comments below, because sometimes the most extraordinary people are hiding in the most ordinary places.